For those of you who don't know me, my name is Pat Moore, and I am the Special Events Coordinator for the Fort Collins Senior Center. This is our 17th year of doing the Cemetery Stroll. So I think this will probably be one of the best cemetery strolls that we've had. We decided to do law and order. So some law, some disorder. You'll have to figure out who was who, okay? We have groups here from Brighton, Lafayette, Louisville, and Longmont. And we have 7 red hat ladies.
My name is Kevin Williams. I'm the crew chief of the Cemeteries Division. Welcome to our cemetery. Grandview Cemetery is celebrating 125 years in operation. Our first burial was in 1887, November of 1887. Felix Scoville, a 3-month-old, is buried in Section K and has a little marker about the size of the top of this podium to denote its burial. Grandview Cemetery has 26,000 spaces, and over 24,000 of them are used. We're getting full rapidly. And without further ado, I'll introduce Richard Cox. He's the chair of the Cemetery Stroll Committee.
Welcome. Thank you for coming out to the 17th Annual Cemetery Stroll. I'm Richard Cox with the Cemetery Stroll Committee. And as our previous speakers have said, our theme this year is Law and Disorder. You will be strolling amongst the spirits, as people have done for the last 17 years. And history truly will come alive today for you. You'll hear many unique stories unique to our community, and this event is unique as well. It is the largest and oldest living history presentation in Fort Collins. This is largely a volunteer, organized, and led event. From the committee that plans it, to the actors that do the portrayals, to the people that will be guiding you to the various grave sites, they're all people that have a love of history and a passion for history. And if you have a love of history and a passion for history, and you enjoy what you see here today, I heartily encourage you to get involved with the Cemetery Stroll. We're always needing people to help us with planning and organizing and acting. It's a unique opportunity. You won't regret it.
I am Robert Miller, and I'm not sure why they have me here, because they said this was supposed to be for disorder. I am not a disorderly man. I am just a businessman trying to make a living. I was born in Copenhagen, Denmark, and at the age of 25, my younger brother Frank and I decided that there was more opportunity in the United States than there was in Copenhagen. And so we chose to come to this country, first through the city of New York, then we moved to Chicago, but we did not like Chicago very well. Chicago was not a very nice town. So we moved to Wisconsin, and then we moved to Des Moines. In Des Moines, I met my Tina, my wife of many years, but Des Moines did not offer for us what we wanted, and so we moved to Colorado. First, we moved to the town of Black Hawk and tried mining for gold. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a mine or not, but it's dirty and it's hard work and you don't make any money. And by this time, my Tina and I had a growing family, and so Frank and I decided that we should find another town to move to. After looking around, we decided that Fort Collins, which was a growing town with 500 people in it, and we felt that there was much opportunity for us to live and to make a living for our families in Fort Collins. So we moved to Fort Collins, and to make a living, I started making bottles, lots of bottles. And I bottled things like soda and sarsaparilla and golden lager, which was made by the Coors Company in Golden City. Now, this was a reasonable business. By this time, my Tina and I had 9 children, 7 boys and 3 girls. And it takes a lot to feed that many children. And so my brother and I, in addition to my bottling business, had what for a better word would be called a saloon. Now there were a number of other saloons in Fort Collins, one of them run by a gentleman by the name of Lindenmeyer, which some of you may have heard of. But there were other people living in Fort Collins too. These temperance ladies. And they kept saying that the drinking of liquor was an evil thing. I don't understand where they got that. It was obvious to my brother Frank and I that these temperance ladies simply did not have enough business of their own to tend to, and thought that it was their job to mind other people's business. And they kept trying to pass these laws. One of them even went to Ohio and came back. Mrs. Collins. Why couldn't she mind her own business? I could not make a living simply selling soda and sarsaparilla. I had to be able to sell alcohol. My brother, he was obviously a man of foresight. He decided that he wanted to make a large building, which was at the corner of Walnut and Linden Street. Part of it was a dry goods business, and part of it was a bar. My bottling business was on College Avenue, just north of Mountain, and we'd had a reasonably prosperous business. But those temperance ladies would not leave us alone. And they passed a law that said that they could not sell liquor, we could not sell liquor, in the city of Fort Collins, nor could we sell it within a mile of the city limits. I never understood how they could say what could happen outside of the city limits of the town. But that was the law, although they discovered that it was a mistake to pass that law, because after a few months, the town ran out of money that they got from our licenses, and so they had to undo the law so that they could charge us money. Well, those temperance ladies, they wouldn't leave it alone, and pretty soon they decided that they needed to pass that law again. And instead of getting money from us for the licenses, they started getting money from us by fining us for selling liquor. Now, the strange thing to me was that out of the 500 people in town, most of them voted for us not to be able to sell liquor. But I never had any trouble selling the liquor. Well, finally, it came to a problem. You see, the Marshal Reichert, had a whole handful of warrants saying that I was bootlegging. So the marshal, he comes to my bottle plant and he tells me I'm under arrest. And finally I am getting more and more angry, and I reach under the counter and I pull out a bottle and I wave it at him. And he tells me to settle down, that I am under arrest and I can't do anything. Well, this made me very angry. So I threw the bottle at him. It hit him in the head. I thought that would teach him to mess with my business. But no, he pulls out his gun and he starts yelling things at me. Well, this is no good. I reach under the bar for another bottle, and he shoots me dead right in front of my son. Now, this is not a good thing. What? Haven't you had enough trouble with me? Do you need more?
I believe I'm going to have to arrest you. You just confessed to bootlegging.
You've already done that.
Well, I'll shoot you.
You've already done that too.
Well, then I'll offer you a drink.
That woman that was just here, Miss Moore, she has a knack with this place. Every year she comes by and she twirls and calls some of us to come on up. Karoo, she calls, karoo. I've been waiting 17 years to answer her call. She wants me to tell you, before I forget, about my experiences as a lawman. Well, I was never a lawman, but back in 1868, there was this fella called Lee Musgrove. He was a hooligan. He had no manners. He came from Mississippi up here to this area, an ex-Confederate, and he roamed around the Rocky Mountains, stealing horses, mules, and whatnot, mainly from the government. One day on my homestead over there by Sam Bingham's Hill, I was going in for breakfast, and I hitched up to the post a nice mule that I had just bought for $350. And as I was going in the door, some fella rode up on his horse. It was Lee Musgrove. By the way, when I was going over this story with Pat, she asked me, do you suppose Lee was an ancestor of Marilyn Musgrave? I said to her, I don't know, Miss Marilyn, Miss Pat, but if she was a horse thief, that might be so. Here comes Lee riding up on his horse. He raises up on the pommel of his saddle. His shotgun went off and killed my mule. He claimed it was an accident. When I turned around and saw what happened, he was already riding away. Well, later, much later, I enticed Lee to come back to my place. Behind the door was Denver City Marshal Dave Cook. And we arrested Lee. And he went down to Denver in custody and spent half a night in the jail down there at Cherry Creek. You see, he'd murdered a man in California, 2 in Nevada, and 1 in Idaho, besides being a horse thief. The people came that night. They took him out of the stockade and under the Cherry Creek Bridge on a wagon. The rest is history for old Lee. Now, when I last left this life in 1904, the Wright brothers had just flown 122 feet out in North Carolina. And the Stanley brothers' steam-powered car had just set a record for going a mile in 29 seconds. Catch me up, will you? What have I missed since then? Janie, come on up and meet these people. Well, I tell you, some of them are a strange lot. All the women are wearing pants. One of them in a blue t-shirt could be arrested. Only a few of them have visited the millinery. Oh my goodness, I have a long way to go. She won't come up, she's stubborn and from Missouri. She was soft and feminine and very socially gracious. We had 5 children together. Some of them are buried right over here. When she died at age 50, I remarried at age 67. I married a gal named Melinda Kelly Maxwell, and we had a nice life together for 8 years. She was also from Missouri, and was she a pistol? They ran Melinda and her husband Tom out of Missouri during the Civil War, the Union Army did, for her lip. She was nobody to go to bat against. We had a great time because we were both comfortable. She had considerable money. In fact, she had almost $1 million when we got married. And as I say, I was comfortable. If there's one thing you take with you today about me, it's this. Melinda and I each donated the land that you're resting on right now and most of the city park. That's our legacy to you. This is a nice area. It's grown since I last looked at it. There's over 23,000 of us now. We never have a recession here. We always grow. Melinda's mother is right here. She was a Kentuckian, Letitia Kelly. Janie's mother's buried here. Melinda's got sisters here, and my dear friend, her brother Hiram, also a stockman from Wyoming. We had 5 children, Janie and I. 3 of them went to the State Agricultural College. I was born in December of 1829 in Fredonia, New York. Now that's on the northeast side of Lake Erie. I was the next youngest of 12 children. My mother lived to be 74. Go beat that. 8 of us, all of us, except for one, survived to adulthood. And at the time I left my alive life, 8 of us were still living. I don't remember much about Fredonia, except the smell. 8 years before I was born there, some guy that excavated the first natural gas well in the United States. He captured it with hollow logs, tar, and rags. Phew. Dad decided to pick up sticks, and we moved about 500 miles down to Black Creek, Ohio. Now we traveled by barge along Lake Erie to Toledo. Then we went south by heavy wagon for the other 200 miles. Now you figure if we were pulling that by oxen, we were making 12 miles a day. So it might have taken us 2 weeks to get to Black Creek. I'd like you to know that I came here and farmed in Nebraska Territory. In 1860 I first came here, when it was Nebraska Territory. 1 year later it became Colorado Territory, and then 1876 Colorado became a state. I got into farming. I made money selling all my vegetables up in Leadville and all the other mining camps. And then I got into stock raising cattle. I began with a herd of 200. One time I sold 7,000 head for $120,000. Well, the cattle industry was good to me and a lot of people up in Wyoming, where I herded my cows. Any city councilman here? I had a nice 3-story home on the northeast corner of the old Safeway store on Remington Street. A quarter lot with stables. They named a street after me and tore down my home.
I am Marie Lafitte. 168 years ago, I was born in Brittany, France, August 1st, 1844. I died right here in Fort Collins 70 years later in 1914. I lived, I died, yet here I stand. I am a ghost here to tell you my story. About the time that Marie landed in Fort Collins, turn of the century, still Victorian times, Fort Collins was a quiet, law-abiding town filled with citizens who were quick to pursue and judge people who refused to live by the conservative rules of the town. Fort Collins' forefathers thought of themselves as upright and staunch, pillars of urban genteel society. Fort Collins' foremothers fancied themselves as selfless, thoughtful, generous people. The people who did not meet these strict standards didn't live here, or for very long. I, Marie Lafitte, presented a different perspective that challenged the notion of social status and standing within the community. Upon my arrival in Fort Collins, it was published in the Fort Collins Weekly Courier newspaper that Mrs. Lafitte, I have never been married in my entire life, Mrs. Lafitte recently arrived from Denver, opened a cigar and confectionery shop at 257 Linden. I called it the Candy Kitchen. In those days, a respectable woman could be a milliner making hats, a cheesemaker, a mistress of a boarding house, a nurse, a teacher, a hairdresser, a dressmaker, maybe a college educator, or a candy and cigar store proprietor such as I was. But I had always, my whole life, challenged social rules. I was a rebel, I was bold, I was a single woman who had never depended on anything or anybody other than myself and my creative business sense. So I decided to expand my candy and cigar business and my income by selling something that is a basic need for everyone, almost everyone in the whole world. Something never goes out of style, something always in top demand. S-E-X. Voila! I added a cozy little place above Candy Kitchen and I called it the Comfy Lodge. I hired some young girls, the so-called brides of the multitudes. Over this, I was in and out of court because indeed I did, quote, keep, maintain, and inhabit a certain disorderly house, unquote. Other names for such places: a bawdy house, house of ill repute, house of assignation, house of ill fame. They were considered against the peace and dignity of the people. Well, given the status of women associated with prostitution, it is amazing that I, Marie Lafitte, as Madame Lafitte as I am now called, inhabits the annals of Fort Collins history. Typically, such women were given 3 choices. $200 to $300 fine, which is equivalent to about $5,000 to $7,000 today. 30 to 90 days in jail, which were always vermin infested, or take the first train out of town. Most women opted for this latter, effectively erasing their names from Fort Collins' social memory. Not I. I stuck around, I fought. I purchased a home, 218 Jefferson Street, for $1,500. In fact, over my 15 years in Fort Collins, I owned 10 properties. Then I decided to add another product to my income. Something cheap to make, Something always, forever in top demand, rain or shine, every day, good times or bad times. Liquor, booze, hooch. I was in and out of court over this also, for selling malt, Venus, mixed, fermented, and spirituous liquors within the city limits. My whiskey, they called it bug juice, was famous. They said it produced a peculiar kind of drunk, inducing near insanity. But I swear, my recipe was simple and harmless. 2 gallons of water, some hops, some popcorn, boil it together, add 2 pounds of brown sugar, a little bit of burnt sugar for color. Oh, I do add maybe a half a teaspoon of grain alcohol. I sell it in quart bottles for 25 cents each. I was arrested and taken to Denver because of my white lightning, white liquor it was called. U.S. Marshals looked up in the mountains for my still, but they never did find it. But they did find me with 45 gallons of whiskey, 27 dozen quart bottles of beer, 35 quarts of wine. They charged me 11 counts and carried a fine of $1,500, which is the same as $35,000 today. So I fought them in court. I declined a lawyer, and I conducted my own case. I never admitted, though, to selling the liquor. I only sell tobacco for 85 cents a plug, and I throw in a bottle of liquor for an accommodation for my friends. I came near to getting contempt of court for my profanity and my manner of addressing the court, but I was mad. You want to know what I said to that judge? I said, I lost the case. They said my defense was so transparently a sham that I kept both the judge and the audience in a roar. I was in legal troubles the whole 15 years that I lived in Fort Collins, most notably with Union Pacific Railroad over some property on Jefferson Street. This case went all the way to the Colorado Supreme Court. And Judge George Salisbury and I battled in court for years over the ownership of the property on Linden Street. We battled outside of court as well. He came to my house one time to get me to sign some papers, and I refused, so he threw me to the ground, hit me repeatedly with his cane, shoved the cane into my mouth, and knocked out some of my teeth. He was a brute. I eventually lost that property to him in 1913, and after that I felt very defeated and deflated. An interesting note to those court cases that they are now presently textbook case and are currently studied by law students. Court cases drained me of all of my assets, but they enhanced my reputation as an intelligent, hard-hitting, non-submissive female, earning the respect of many prominent people. A few months short of my 70th birthday, in March of 1914, my house on Elm Street, then considered an ill-kept hovel, burned down. I barely escaped the flames, escaping into the yard practically naked. They took me to County Hospital, where I died from the fire trauma and complications from my diabetes. But immediately following my death, it became clear that I did indeed win my suit with Union Pacific Railroad. So I died penniless and homeless, but nonetheless a winner. I, Marie Lafitte, refused to be bullied. I fought for my sense of dignity and humanity against very powerful men in this community. For 15 years, I was a force to be reckoned with. I was not merely a madam and a bootlegger. I was a real estate investor, a business owner, a problem solver, and a legal expert. Most importantly, I was a human being that demanded my dignity. I am Marie Lafitte.
My name is Eva Schuyler. I was born in April of 1854 in the state of New York, but soon changed my name to Mrs. James Howe at the young age of 15 years old, when I met and married James, who was 40 years old at the time. James and I came from educated, good families in New York. But in the spring of 1880, we moved to Fort Collins. James established himself as a well-to-do mill worker. In fact, James first gained fame in Fort Collins in the newspaper for being the first person to alert the town to the famous Welch Block fire. James was coming home late one night and he saw flames coming from the Welch Block. Now this is where the Austin's restaurant now is. James went over to the flames and he saw Mrs. Welch, who had jumped from a window to avoid burning to death. James and I were staying at what is now the Northern Hotel. He brought her there to stay safe. Now, James was considered a hero. James was one of the first hose cart boys in Fort Collins with the volunteer fire department because he was one of the fastest runners. Incidentally, in the 1880s, saloon owners gave one free drink to each of the firemen for each fire that they put out to motivate them to keep putting out those fires. In 1882, James and I had our one and only daughter, Gertrude. Life was good. In 1885, James moved us to Weld County. James became a chief miller at Governor Eaton's mill. Now, it is said that a few years later, we moved back to Fort Collins, and we lived in a duplex on Walnut Street. Our home is now where the Armadillo restaurant parking lot is. We socialized with many people in town. In fact, James enjoyed socializing at the saloons, and he was known to drink a lot. James would come home often and take his aggressions out on me. So I often wear gloves and hats to cover the bruises. April 3rd, 1888, James came home from a night of drinking. He beat me worse than ever. He threatened he was going to kill me. So I decided to call the police, who arrived in a short time. They went to get James off the bed and take him to the front door. Beating a woman was not a crime the civilized men of Fort Collins took lightly. But I decided to not have James arrested because I was afraid of social stigma. So the police were forced to leave without James. The next morning, April 4th, 1888, I woke up and made James breakfast as I did every morning. James left to go to work for the day. As soon as he left, I grabbed Gertie, who was then 5 years old, and took her to the neighbor's house. I went back to the house and started packing. I was going to take Gertie, and we were going to leave James and go to Ontario to be with my parents. Unfortunately, James came home early that day. He came home at noon and walked through the door. He saw the packed steamer trunk. He flew off the handle. He attacked me. I went stumbling out the front door and into the yard, only to have James follow me, and he had a knife. He stood over me. He cut me on one side of the face and with the other hand slit my throat. I tried to stand up to yell, "Murder!" but only made it to my own fence and fell over and died at the age of 34 years old. Now, a couple people saw what was happening out in the streets, and a few men went into the house to get James and arrest him. They found James laying on the bed. He did not resist arrest at all. And they took him down to the jail, and a band of men followed yelling, "Vengeance!" That evening at 8 o'clock at night, the electric lights were cut out in the city. It was complete blackness. A band of men gathered, some of them masked, and met at the jail cell. Not a word was spoken. They broke James out of jail, and James was begging and pleading, "Don't kill me, don't lynch me." But the men had a rope and a noose out front. They took James outside to the streets, put the noose around him, and hung him. The men dispersed. Again, not a word was spoken. The lights in the city turned back on. Life resumed as it did, normally. Now, Gertie went to Ontario to be raised by my parents. James and I are both buried here at Grandview Cemetery. Neither of us have headstones, but where we are buried is where the orange flag is, right behind you. We are buried in the Potter's Field. The Potter's Field is an area that criminals and people without money were buried. But it was said that I was buried in a dark mahogany casket. My guess is maybe the townspeople did that just out of respect for me. But because of my death, a town committee was formed to investigate any future domestic violence thereafter. Thank you for coming.
I'm happy to introduce myself as Joshua McIntyre, born in 1839 in Villanova, New York. Villanova, kind of the western side of the state. And my parents picked up following my birth and moved to Erie, Pennsylvania, which is along Lake Erie. And I was educated there. Father was a farmer and received my high school and elementary education in Erie. Following high school, I moved down to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and went to school at a vocational commercial school and got degrees in marketing and sales and vocational training. And again, we loved the Pennsylvania area, and but my high school sweetheart, sweet Lucy Richards, was stronger than any place I'd ever moved to. You know the urge from high school. Lucy and I were married in 1862, and she had gone to school in Pittsburgh also, had her teaching degree. But I joined up the Union Army in 1862, the Pennsylvania Volunteer Cavalry, and fought on the Union side during the Civil War. In 1863, during a battle in Shepherdstown, Virginia, I was shot in the face on the left cheekbone that immediately severed my optic nerve in the left eye. So that eye was completely blinded. A piece of the shell, as it entered the head, splintered off and got over into the left jaw, or the right jaw, and embedded into that area of my head and remained there all my life. They could never operate on that. But following the battle, I lay for the 24 hours on the battlefield and was picked up by the Confederate Army, taken to a medical facility. But thank goodness, 1 week later, the Union and Confederate swapped prisoners. So I was moved back into Pennsylvania on the Union side and started to receive very good treatment for my head injury. After 3 or 4 months in infirmary, I returned to the front line. But I also got a promotion to captain. Not a bad exchange. With one decent eye and one totally blind, I was able to fulfill the functions. Following the war, in 1864, Lucy and I moved to Missouri because Lucy had this big urge to go west. Young man or young woman? That's right. She loved the wide open prairie of Missouri land, and we built a small general store, constructed that up. She taught school while we constructed and got going on that. In the meantime, I supplemented income by doing sales in a horse and buggy around the area for the Marshall Fields Company, and also started studying law. Now, law back in the 1800s was just so many credit hours. You could do at home almost. and you got your degree, quote unquote, and was elected the county judge for 2 terms, Caldwell County, Missouri. Enjoyed it, but it also enthused me to get more education in law. 1878, Lucy needed to go further west, Fort Collins. Why? She had a friend, and you follow a woman's intuition. We resided in Fort Collins, built a house on 117 Matthews Street. That home is now registered as a historical building in our city. Beautiful facility, and we resided there. But wouldn't you know, I needed to have higher education in law and commuted to Ann Arbor, Michigan, by train. But I got the degree. Had 14 years of practice here in the city. I lost totally the right eye, finally went blind, and so I was totally blind at that point. The lead poisoning of the shell remaining in my skull affected my body, and I passed at age 53. Too young, but resided, enjoyed it. Lucy continued her work in the town with the library, reading services, of course, still strong with the WTCU, kept the hard liquor out of the town. Was a tough fight. Truly it was. But truly it was a lovely place to live. Our oldest son was the only one that resided with us, but he passed very early at 1883, at age 16. So of the 7 children that we produced, all of them fell early, way too early. 3 of them were lost to childbirth. So you see, raising children back in the early days was very difficult. Very difficult. I'll only add the fact that I'm blind myself and a member of the National Blind Organization. There are currently 800 or 900 blind attorneys throughout this country. And most of you should know that with the adaptive equipment that's available for the blind today, it's so easy to have all the law books, all the policies read to them. Synthetic reading, but it's the adaptive equipment, adaptive technology that's been provided for the visually impaired and blind. Many law schools accept blind attorneys, blind students very readily, and it's just a common occupation.
Great. That's
wonderful.
Great.
Thank you all very much.
Well, howdy, folks. Morning. Thanks for coming out today. Now, I'm not sure why they asked me to speak here at this thing, because I'm not rich or famous. I might have been a little infamous. In fact, I started my life as poor as they come. I was an orphan in Iowa. Now, it doesn't get much worse than that. I was adopted by Frank and Catherine Potts. They were good people in those days that adopted me. And we lived in this small town in Iowa. But when my adoptive mother died, my dad decided it'd be a good idea to move us to Denver, the big city, and maybe make a fortune. So in 1885, when I was about 9, we moved off to the big city. And my dad never made that fortune, and before long he couldn't even take care of me anymore. So I went off to live with Miss Catherine Moon. Now you fine folks might know her better as Lady Moon, because she was a wealthy landowner and rancher in these here parts, near Red Feather. Now she always had a big heart for children, especially those that were down on their luck. And I don't care what they said about her, she was a good woman, even though she might have drank a little bit, maybe swear a little bit. And it was rumored that she had a parrot that swore too. Now, I was kind of like a son to her, and she raised me up there on the ranch. And I was a pretty good cowboy too. Now, there used to be a cowboy tournament up there in the big city of Cheyenne, but Fort Collins decided in 1907 that they could do it bigger and better. So they decided to make a cowboy tournament of their own, and I won first place in roping and branding that first year. I was a pretty good shot too, because there was this place we used to hang out called the Log Cabin Hotel, and now it was a little bit of a rowdy place, and I had a few rowdy friends. One of them was my neighbor St. Clair, and he was a good old boy. Well, maybe not too good of a boy, because he served a prison sentence for shooting a guy. And there was the Montana Kid, and a guy named Butcher Knife Ike. I'll let you fill in the blank for what Butcher Knife Ike might have done. But here we played a lot of cards, and we might have gambled a little bit too. And this man named Ray Williams came in one day and wanted to play some cards. But he wasn't too good. By the end of the night, he went flat broke. Well, he decided that he would get angry, got up, flipped over the table, and started a fist fight. Now that wasn't too smart, because me and my boys were a lot stronger and better with our fists than him. But before long, the whole bar jumped in. Now I got sick of getting swung at, so I pulled out my revolver and shot a few rounds. Now I wasn't shooting directly at Williams, because if I was, I would have hit him. But he thought I was and ran out screaming like a little schoolgirl. Now he pressed charges, but when we were in court, everyone was so drunk that night, none of the stories came out straight, and so they let us all go. Now, like I said, I worked for Lady Moon. I was one of her ranch hands, but Cecil Moon, which was her second husband, never much liked me. I'm not sure exactly why, but it was rumored that me and Lady Moon were lovers. Now, Lady Moon was born Kate or Catherine in Ireland, and she came to America when she was about 12, but she came to Larimer County when she was about 18, and that's where she met her first husband, Frank. Now, Frank was a miner, and he made a whopping $1 a day. Now, $1 a day doesn't get you far today, and it surely didn't get you that far then either. They could barely make ends meet, so she decided to start her own business washing the miners' clothes. As you can imagine, the miners got a little dirty, and so before long she was making more money than Frank. Now, she was what you folks might call an entrepreneur, and she was able to buy a 160-acre ranch right here in these parts. Now, the ranch was not too far from this school. It was a ranching school for remittance men. Does anybody here know what a remittance man is? You are the first one today, so why don't you tell us?
The rich English families sent them to America to get rid of them.
That is correct. Now, the rich English had more money than sense, so they sent their kids over here to learn something. Now, they paid good money to teach these boys how to dig a hole and build some fences. The ranching school was kind of mocked in this area because they were just making money off the poor rich folk in England. Now, one of these remittance men was named Cecil, and Cecil got real sick one day, and before long he was about to die, so they brought in Mrs. Moon to take care of him. Now, during this time where she was taking care of him, they fell in love. Now, this was a bit scandalous because she was already married to Frank. Now, she divorced Frank and decided to run off with Cecil, probably because he had more money, because it wasn't because he had sense. Now, they went back to England to collect the fortune, and he gambled away $10,000 in one sitting. Well, he gave the rest of the money to Lady Moon so she could take care of it, because he knew he couldn't do it. But I don't say that he wasn't too smart because he lost. I say he wasn't too smart because he took that losing hand, decided it would be a badge of honor, and put it up in a frame over his fireplace, and used to invite people over and show them it. Now, I don't think that's too smart. Now, he, like I said before, he didn't much like me. And I guess the feeling was mutual. But I only say that because back in February of 1909, I got into a little trouble. And he tried to make it worse by spreading some rumors that I was stealing horses and keeping them on his ranch. And I think I came about those horses fair and square. Now, one night when I was about 30, me and my boys decided it would be a good time to rob a train. At least that's what they wrote about me in the Denver Post. It was the Denver passenger train number 4. And me and my boys, we put our masks on so nobody would know who we were, walked up to the front of the train, pulled out our guns, and told them to stop, take us to the money. Now, they took us to the mailroom, and this was the day before Valentine's Day, and we found $1,000 in the mailroom and ran off with it. Now, I say they wrote about me in the Denver Post because I claim I was innocent. Now, I was down in Denver at the time, but I was staying at the Curtis house, which was a rooming house. Well, you might call it one of those houses of ill repute. And I've got a lot of young ladies that would tell you that I wasn't robbing no train at 2:50 in the morning, which is what they said. The evidence against me was purely circumstantial, which means they didn't have anything real good on me. Some guy had saw me in a bar with a bankroll, thought I must have been a robber. Now, another guy saw me driving a coach around down there in Denver and thought I was hanging out with the wrong crowd, so they thought maybe I was the one that robbed the train. But like I said, they had worn some masks, so no one really knew who they were. And between that and my real good lawyer, which was bought by Mrs. Moon and paid for, now she spent a lot of money on that lawyer, he got me off. And we decided that was too much trouble for one lifetime, so we moved back up to Fort Collins. Now, I was a ranch hand on Lady Moon's ranch most of the rest of my life. I did marry and settle down. But before long, I developed gallstones. I became so sick that I had to get an operation down here in Fort Collins. Now, that operation was the last-ditch effort to save my life, and a few months later, I died. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.